Blog Talk
Hello.
Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all-new episode of the Ajay Bruno Show. We're doing one of those special interviews today. I will try to get to some of the questions that some of you submitted. If you want, you're free to call into the show, but I don't know if we'll have time to get to the phones today. Anyway, my guest is Scott Wolter. He is a forensic geologist and historian, host of such shows as History's America Unearthed and Pirate Treasure of the Knights Templar. And I'm happy to welcome him today. I believe we have him on the line now. Scott, hello.
Hey, AJ, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. First, I was curious, what made you originally want to pursue forensic geology, and how did human history get tied into that?
Well, I've been involved in forensic science for over 30 years now. I started pretty much right out of college, working in the construction industry, looking at, problem concrete failures, and issues, low strength, cracking concrete, and failures and things like that. So I continue to do that. I've been working all through, the TB stuff that I've done, but I was busy with that for about 15 years until the Kensington runestone came into my lab. That's really where things went in a different direction, and it was completely unexpected. I had never heard of the runestone prior to that, and it was an interesting story, but we get involved in a lot of interesting cases that have nothing to do with history or runestones or controversial history or anything like that, but it was the runestone that really took it in a different direction, and it was unexpected from the standpoint of they wanted me to help them try to understand if the inscription from a geological standpoint was old and weathered, and so that's what I focused my attention on, and after comparing the weathering with tombstones of known age, I concluded that it was indeed hundreds of years old, and therefore it could not be the late 19th century hoax that everybody had claimed, and that it had to be genuine. And and then the backlash from that conclusion, which was surprising and disappointing, but what it did is it launched me into this new field of study, this historical mysteries, investigating those things. That's what started it.
That's definitely interesting. I'm pretty familiar with the runestone myself, but I'm wondering, why do you think the Knights Templar came to the New World, and what made them venture that far west?
Well, the whole idea of the Templars is something that, people go, how did you get going on that? And the simple answer is I followed the evidence trail. That's what we do in the forensic field, is you compile the evidence and you go where it takes you, and it was really a pretty straight line that took me to the Templars. And I should say, when I say the Templars, that's the group that everybody thinks about, but you got to remember there were their brethren, and the ones that officially created them were the white monks called the Cistercians. They were led by Bernard de Clairvaux back in the early part of the 12th century. He was the one that wrote the charter for the Knights Templar. So when you talk about the Templars, you really, they were Cistercian monks as well. The only difference was they served a different function within the order, and they were the ones that, get all the headlines today, but people forget about their brethren that were a very important part of the operation. But once I started to study their history and what actually happened after the put down of 1307, when the Templars and the Cistercians were really at the height of their power and success and influence over Europe, I think their enemies realized, and their enemies were the monarchs of Europe and the Roman Catholic Church, realized that if they didn't do something to undermine these orders, that they were going to take over Europe. And, you don't hear too many historians talking about that, because I don't think they really understand what was going on. This was essentially the greatest coup d'etat in history that people are just now starting to figure out. And so the best way, the most effective way to undermine them, and of course, King Philip the Fair was heavily indebted to the Templars, and the church had their own reasons for supporting him. So, by bringing down the Templars, the guys with the swords, you really cut the Achilles from this giant that was the Cistercians and the Templar orders that were at the height of their success. So that was very effective. But, I think the problem that we have historically and working on Pirate Treasure of the Knights Templar really helped me understand something I guess I already knew but didn't really fully appreciate, was how the Templars continued on after 1307. It was hardly the end. It was really the beginning of a new chapter. And so in Portugal, for example, where we spent a lot of time on the new show, we came to realize that they were very, very busy in the Indian Ocean, establishing settlements and colonies in India and in the Far East and Madagascar, and they were making a ton of money. And they were traveling all over the world, including North America. But North America was very important because in the end, they saw that as their sanctuary, the place where they could, and they knew about this for a long time prior to the put down, and really for hundreds, if not over 1,000 years, these families knew about North America, South America, Central America, but ultimately they knew that their plan in Europe wasn't going to materialize, so they turned their attention to the New World, and the runestone, for example, was a land claim, and it was placed at the headwaters of the major rivers on our continent, and it was to establish this land claim, which, ironically, if you look at the land claim, it's pretty much the same as the Louisiana Purchase. And the fact that we purchased that land from France and that the Cistercians and the Templars' home base was in France, I don't think that's a coincidence.
It certainly makes sense, but since the Portuguese order, the Order of Christ, I believe it's called, survived.
Yep, the Order of Christ.
There's different groups now that claim to be Templars, but I don't think they have any actual true connection. So at what point did it fade out, or what exactly do you think happened?
Well, the Order of Christ, a.k.a. the Knights Templar Order, continued as an official order in Portugal until 1835. They were not put down until then, officially, when the King and Queen of Portugal disbanded the order. So they went on for another 500 years. And that's incredible if you think about it. But again, when you talk about the Templars and these pseudo-orders and all of this, you have to understand that at the core of all of this is you're talking about a group of people, a group of families and their supporters who had ideological differences between the Roman Catholic Church and the monarchies of Europe. I mean, this was the fundamental issue that was in play here. And so ideology is something that, we see playing out different ideologies fighting against each other. That's what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's been going on forever. Religious ideology specifically. By the way, AJ, did you notice the coincidence that these Paris attacks took place on Friday the 13th?
I didn't notice that, but that is strange.
I don't think that's a coincidence either. Because if you look back historically, Paris was where the Grand Priory was, the home base of the Knights Templar for over 200 years. Eventually their castle or their commandery was destroyed, but it was in Paris, France. And who were the primary enemies of the Templars historically? The Muslims. And so, they fought for hundreds of years against the Templars, and again, it was an ideological war. Now, some people will say they were fighting for the church. Well, they certainly were, and Roman Catholicism would have been their enemy as well. But I think there's more that's going on here. I think the Muslims understand more about what was really going on at that time than I think even people today do. Now, that doesn't make them smarter or anything. It's just that people have turned a blind eye to this for other political and religious reasons. But there's no way in my mind that Paris attacks were a coincidence happening on Friday the 13th.
No, the date definitely suggests otherwise. So do you think that the Templars brought certain artifacts, the Holy Grail, Ark of the Covenant, that they're probably in the U.S. or somewhere in the New World somewhere, or what's your thinking?
If I were a betting man, I would say probably. Now, there's some people that believe that there are many Ark of the Covenants, but I would venture to guess that there's probably one that's revered above the others. And if the Templars did establish the new sanctuary, and their ideological descendants, the founding fathers, finished the job, I would say that there's probably a lot of relics here. I don't think they're on Oak Island. They may have been at one time, but they were moved. I mean, the Templars aren't stupid. They don't leave their stuff laying around for people to find. Nothing against the Lagina brothers. I mean, they seem like good guys, but there's nothing going on at Oak Island today, in my opinion. But maybe they'll prove us wrong.
Some people think the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has it, but I'm not sure about that.
Say again?
Some people believe the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has the Ark.
Oh, yeah. Well, they might indeed have one of the arks that are out there. I mean, the other thing that could be going on here, I don't know if I necessarily believe this, but I think some people have suggested that the reason that there's more than one Ark of the Covenant is to, keep people off the trail of where the real Ark is. But I'm not really sure what's going on there, but if there is the Ark out there somewhere, I think it probably is in this country. That's my guess. I don't think it's in the Grand Canyon, even though we spent time looking for it there. But I don't know. I guess if I was a betting man and we could know the answer, I'd put my money on North America.
Well, I'm curious about your other show, America Unearthed. A number of the topics had to deal with Europeans or Egyptians being in somewhere in the U.S. in ancient or medieval times. How strongly do you feel about that being a likelihood?
Oh, I think that's definitely. I don't think it's a possibility. I think it's a certainty, and it's one of those things that it's difficult to prove. But I think there's plenty of evidence here that suggests that there were cultures that were coming here to North America for thousands of years. And, it's funny, I have many friends who are with various Native American tribes here in North America. And there are a number of elders and people within the tribe that say, yeah, we know all about the people that came here in the distant past. This is part of our history. But then there are some Native Americans, I heard from one on Twitter last night who was accusing me of being racist for suggesting that ancient cultures came to North America, as if I'm somehow suggesting on the show that many of the things that are found here that point to ancient cultures coming here is somehow racist against Native Americans. And I just don't understand that. That's typically an academic response that is a way of trying to dismiss what we're doing. And of course, when they can't dismiss, the work that we're doing with any evidence, they attack us personally. And of course, nobody wants to be called a racist. So this is something they think is going to be effective. And I just don't play that way. I'm not going to put up with that crap for 2 seconds because I don't believe that I have a racist at all. In fact, I think I've never suggested that certain things were done by Europeans because Native Americans couldn't do them. I've suggested Europeans did them because Native Americans said they did not do them. So if they didn't do them, and I pointed out to one person on Twitter, I said, well, okay, are you suggesting that Native Americans carved these rune stones, that they built the Newport Tower, that they were the ones that built Stonehenge, and many of these astronomical chambers that we find here in this country? We have asked them specifically, and they said, we didn't do that. So is that racist? I don't think so.
No. So you'd say the Solutrean hypothesis, that would be true?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that's true. Here again, I don't think that's racist. I think the evidence suggests that there was a European culture dating back maybe as far as 22 to 25,000 years ago, when there was glacial ice in the North Atlantic that would have allowed them to follow the edge of the ice, chasing after seal herds and other food sources into what is now North America. I don't know why that's some heretical idea. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. According to scholars like Dennis Stanford at the Smithsonian Institution, he has evidence in the form of Solutrean-style points and geologically certain types of flint that don't occur here in North America that are well-known sources in Europe. So what's the problem? I mean, why is this a problem? I mean, to me, it's like, okay, it's an interesting hypothesis. Let's take a look at it. But unfortunately, there are a lot of scholars out there that, for some reason, this is heresy. That it was the Clovis was it, and anybody who suggests otherwise is a heretic. I just don't understand that thinking. Science is always open to new ideas, new evidence, and things are changing all the time. My gosh, all you have to do is read the newspapers, and new studies are coming out all the time talking about this is good for your health, coffee is bad, wine is good, wine is bad, sugar is good, sugar is bad, eggs are good. I mean, it just goes on. But the point is that science is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. But yet there are certain subjects in academia where they just have a different set of rules, and I don't agree with that.
Sure, you'd think they'd want to consider all possibilities, but...
Well, you would think so, but in many cases, some of these people, and I emphasize the word some, because I'm not putting everybody in the same basket, and I'm not painting all scholars and academics with the same brush. But some of these people have their heads clearly buried in the sand. They're protecting their old theses, and they're trying they're resistant to change, and this is not how science works. And I think many of these people, and I've said this many times, are more interested in being right than getting the right answer. And that's just not the way it should be.
That's true. If you had to pick one accepted mainstream aspect of our history that you'd wager anything on, that's incorrect, would you say it would be this in general, or is there something specific?
Well, I mean, I really don't think anybody seriously thinks that Christopher Columbus discovered anything. I mean, he really didn't. I mean, first of all, he never set foot on the continent. There were tens of millions of people already living here. The whole notion of Columbus from the get-go discovering America was ridiculous. But yet that is still something that we talk about today. I mean, it's and we have Columbus Day. Well, it's starting to change. I mean, many states are adopting Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think is a great idea. But that would probably be one of them. But there's a bunch. I mean, there are just a whole bunch of things here that are problematic that I think really are starting to change. And one of them is this problem with certain members of academia, specifically in soft science disciplines like history, like language, like anthropology, like archaeology. Many people don't even realize that these are not hard science disciplines, but the way some of these people operate, again, I say some, it's easy to see that they're not hard science disciplines because it shows in the way they conduct themselves and the way that they do their research.
Well,
it's a big part of the reason we have this problem.
Yeah. No, I've definitely noticed that. I guess if someone produces evidence that upends the whole historical narrative, then maybe they're afraid of what happens then. So.
Well, I think that's part of it. Again, I think all of a sudden, what many of these people have built their careers on suddenly would just go out the window, and they're fearful, and they're protective, and they're defensive, and these are natural human reactions to things that happen to us that we don't like. So, but I guess on one hand, yes, I guess that would be considered a threat, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity, and I would love to see more people like Dennis Stanford jump on these opportunities to. There's all kinds of new doors that are opened by some of the things that we talk about on our shows, and it'd be great to see some of these academics walk through those doors and realize these opportunities and make a name for themselves in getting the history right. I mean, the bottom line is let's just get it right.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Actually, with the time we have left, I want to get to specifically your involvement with history. I was curious, how did your involvement with them first begin?
Well, the first thing that we did with History Channel was we made a documentary that I guess aired yesterday or the day before, because I always get a flood of emails after either the show or the documentaries air. And that was something that was an outgrowth of our research on the runestones and the Newport Tower and things that we did over in Europe. And I was approached by Andy and Maria Oz with Committee Films, and they said, "Hey, this would make a great documentary. Let's put one together." And so we did, and they just followed the trail that I had taken, and the documentary that came out of that did very well. I think it was one of the most successful, if not the most successful documentary that history's ever done. And it continues to air. And I think the reason that it was successful is because it resonated with a lot of people that what we were showing in the show was true. It just resonated with them that there was something real about it. And there is. So that's really where it started, and then there was another documentary that was put together called Who Really Discovered America, and then basically approached me and said, "Hey, do you think we could do a series? Is there enough material here?" And I laughed and I said, "Absolutely." And that's what became America Unearthed.
Now, is there one particular mystery you've done on the show so far that really stands out to you as the most intriguing?
That's tough because there are a lot of things that we did that I thought were great and demanded further investigation. I would have to say that I love the Roanoke episode and the Dare Stones, which were something that up until I first walked into that museum and I looked at those artifacts, I had never heard of them. And I was very intrigued by what I saw. And unfortunately, I didn't have any time to do any in-depth analysis. I only had a few hours with the artifacts, but I spent some time with them, and they were very intriguing. And there's some follow-up work that I would love to do on them that I think could perhaps shed new light. Now, I know there was another short series that was done, I think a 2-hour special with the guys that did the Giant show, and I didn't watch it, but I heard about it, and it didn't sound like they pushed the ball down the field too much further, but I think we could, if we did a follow-up on that. I would love to do that. There's some really good science that we could do. But you know what? I'd have to say if I had to pick one, it would have to be the Tucson lead artifacts that were found in the 1920s. Those artifacts are incredible. They date back to the 8th and 9th centuries A.D., and they were found in a pristine archaeological context. It was well documented, and they're 100% genuine. And they open up an incredible new chapter of American history in the Southwest, of a European culture that came to North America. And I would love to do some more work on that story. We just didn't have time, but it was really a thrill to be able to tell the grandson of Thomas Bent, who was one of the two guys that worked on those artifacts back in the 1920s, that these were absolutely genuine artifacts. And it's interesting the parallels that their family went through. Just like the Olaf Oman family and their descendants that went through all the ridicule and criticism, after he found the Kensington runestone. And it was great to be able to tell them that they're absolutely genuine, just like the runestone's genuine.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And Roanoke, you mentioned that's one in particular that always left me puzzled. What exactly do you think happened with that colony?
Well, to say that I know for sure would not be correct, because I don't know for sure what happens. But the Dare stones, some of them that I think could be genuine, and there's a lot of questions about those. That's why I think they need to be studied more, because what's at stake, I think, is very important. But they tell the story that Eleanor Dare survived, and she likely was taken by one of the local native tribes. She may have married one of the chiefs. She may have had some additional children and lived for some years after the Roanoke colony was abandoned. So I think that story is, if that's true, is an incredible story, and there are some avenues of investigation that could be pursued, and I think it be a great story. I mean, regardless of what the outcome is, if it turns out that the artifacts are not genuine, well, then they're not genuine. But at least the question is answered. But I think the possibility of what the story could be absolutely needs to be vetted out, and I think geology could play a very important role in answering some of those questions.
And the rest of the colony, you think they were killed, went back to Europe, or?
Oh, they didn't go back to Europe. I mean, they basically disappeared. Personally, I think most of them probably were killed, but I think some of them survived. I think Eleanor Dare survived. I think the first stone that was found, I mean, all indications are that it's genuine. I don't think there's any reason to question that one. No legitimate reasons to question it. But the subsequent stones that were found, are they genuine? Do they tell the story of what happened to her and maybe some of the others? I think they could. I'm not saying for sure, but they absolutely need to be followed up on.
Sure. At the end of the Pirate Treasure of the Knights Templar program, there was an artifact you were going to study more. I was curious, and since the show has aired, has there been any new developments on that?
Which artifact are you talking about? Are you talking about some of the artifacts that Barry Clifford found?
Yes, it was one of the artifacts he found in Madagascar.
Do you remember which one it was? Because there were a number of artifacts, and there were several that would be nice to follow up on. Do you remember which one?
I remember specifically. I know at the end of the show you were discussing it. There was an inscription you were trying to... it was the map. It was Captain Kidd's map. His instructions on how to find the treasure. Yeah, that one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about the ciphered message that was... I don't think it was Captain Kidd. Yes. It was Labouze.
Labouze, yes.
Yeah, with the Flaming Cross of Goa and the treasure that was taken from the Portuguese ship that left Goa in the 1720s. No, we have not followed up on that. That's a box cipher. It's a Masonic box cipher code that has some strange characters. But it is funny that you bring up these ciphers and these coded messages, because I'm actually working on something right now. There is a treasure trove of manuscripts that have been published dating back to the 1300s that have many of the mysterious characters that scholars said never existed and were not used, and so on and so forth, in various inscriptions found here in North America. And it turns out these manuscripts, which were just published this past year online, absolutely prove that these things did exist and were in use. And it's going to be interesting now because I'm in the midst of writing a paper. Another researcher is writing a paper about some of the findings in these manuscripts, and they basically refute directly what some of these scholars have said. And so it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this. I mean, in a perfect world, they would see this evidence and say, hey, you know what? I have to take another look at this. And, who's going to blame them for saying that? But if I was a betting man, I would say that they will either ignore them or they will try to find a way to maintain their position when the obvious that's in conflict with that, is contrary to that, is staring them in the face. But we'll see what happens. I mean, we'll give them an opportunity to respond. But the point is that there's all kinds of secret coded alphabets, and unless you have the key word or you have the code key, they're almost impossible to decipher. You need sophisticated computer programs that can go through and test these things, because I'll tell you what, they did a good job of concealing their communication.
I hope there's one that can. I'm curious what it says. So.
Oh, me too.
Okay, finally, is there a new season of America Unearthed coming up, or are there any other major projects you can tell us about?
Well, what happened with America Unearthed, excuse me, well, first of all, I think people need to understand that cable ratings in general are down significantly. I mean, last year they were talking about 40%. I don't know what it is this year, but that's significant. And so what happened was H2 was sold to Vice, and at the end of this year, my understanding is it will be done. So that's about a month away. And so our show was the number one show on the network, but if the station's going away, there's no reason to continue. So now all of a sudden history has all these programs, and they have to decide what are they going to air. And as it sits right now, I don't know if they're going to do America Unearthed or not. So America Unearthed is still alive. They didn't cancel it, but we are, we're waiting to see if it's going to continue. I can tell you that there's plenty of things. We had another season all teed up, ready to go, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to continue with that. There's some great stuff. In fact, I think the best stuff we had not looked at yet. So I'm optimistic that we'll hear something soon, but as it sits right now, we're in a holding pattern.
Oh, well. No, I know they just changed History International H2 a few years ago, so the fact that they're selling it is surprising to me. So.
Well, you know what? I mean, the reality of life is that the world is changing, and, the way people watch television, especially young people, is different than it was when I grew up. They don't want to watch commercials. They don't want to wait until 8 o'clock on Saturday night to watch their favorite show. And the other thing is they like to binge watch 3, 4, 5 episodes in a row. I like to do that too. And quite frankly, I think they should have that opportunity. Why not? So people are watching television. They're streaming shows when they want to watch them, and they don't want to watch commercials. And so the old way of cable television is really going the way of the passenger pigeon. Now the good news is that the demand for quality content is higher than it's ever been. So there will be shows made. I think that this, the subject matter that we deal with is something that a lot of people are interested in, and so I'm confident we'll be doing, more with that. But what's changing is how it's going to be delivered. And so I think the cable channels have to change with the times, or they're gonna die.
I mean, that's too bad. Personally, I find your shows reminiscent of kind of a modern day Indiana Jones. So I'd much rather see that than some of the reality shows they put on now. So.
Well, I have to say, AJ, that I agree with you, but everybody likes different things, and so I think it's great that people have the opportunity to watch whatever it is they want. But I think there's a lot more people that are. I think there's a lot of people out there that if you give them something interesting, something intellectually stimulating and challenging, they will respond to it and they will enjoy that. I mean, I like mindless television too, once in a while, but I also like to have something that forces me to think, and so I think we'll see that continue. I really do.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Oh, great. Well, listen, thanks for having me on. It's always good to to get the message out there, and I appreciate the opportunity, AJ. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye. Later.
Bye.
All right, everyone. That was Scott Wolter. Interesting conversation. We didn't really have time to get to calls, but thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this is Ajay Bruno, the Ajay Bruno Show, signing off.